The morning air vibrated with the cacophony of construction at the heart of Manhattan. Dust clouds billowed as a wrecking ball crashed into the facade of the Mayfield Community Library, the last holdout in Thaddeus Wright's vision for the gleaming Olympus Tower. Cassidy Bell clutched her worn canvas bag tighter against her chest as she watched in horror, her chestnut curls whipping across her face in the September breeze. The 30-year-old librarian had spent a sleepless night chained to the building's entrance, only to be gently but firmly removed by police officers at dawn. "You can't do this," she shouted, her voice lost amid the destruction. "This library has served this community for 87 years. The crowd of protesters behind her, a modest gathering of elderly patrons and passionate bookworms, raised their handmade signs higher, but the demolition continued unabated. A sleek black Bentley glided to a stop at the edge of the cordoned area. The rear door opened, and out stepped Thaddeus Wright, 42, imposingly tall, with raven hair touched by silver at the temples and eyes the color of aged whiskey. The tabloids called him the Wolf of Fifth Avenue, a ruthless real estate mogul with a legendary golden touch and an equally notorious black book of conquests. Thaddeus adjusted his hand-tailored Brioni suit and surveyed the scene with clinical detachment. This was merely step one in a billion-dollar development that would transform the neighborhood and cement his legacy. "Mr. Wright," his assistant, Miles, jogged up to him with a tablet. "The press is asking for a statement about the protesters." Thaddeus waved dismissively. "Tell PR to handle it. I've got meetings all day." That's when he saw her. A woman breaking through the security line, marching straight toward his Bentley with the determination of someone with nothing to lose. Cassidy had spotted him immediately, the man responsible for destroying her beloved sanctuary. Without thinking, she ducked under the barrier tape and stormed across the rubble-strewn lot. "Mr. Wright," she called out, her voice stronger than she felt. "Do you have any idea what you're destroying? Lives are built in that library. Dreams are discovered there." Security guards moved to intercept her, but Thaddeus raised a hand to stop them, intrigued by this fiery interruption to his meticulously scheduled day. "And you are?" he asked, one eyebrow arched imperiously. "Cassidy Bell, head librarian." She corrected herself with a bitter edge. "Former head librarian of the building you're currently pulverizing for another soulless skyscraper." A small smile played at the corner of Thaddeus's mouth. Most people cowered or flattered in his presence. This woman looked ready to throw a punch. "Miss Bell, progress requires sacrifice. This neighborhood will benefit from the jobs and economic stimulus the Olympus project will bring." "Progress?" Cassidy scoffed. "You're replacing community with commodity. But what would you know about that? Men like you see the world as property to acquire, not places where people actually live." Something flickered in Thaddeus's eyes. Irritation. Certainly, but also a spark of something else. Challenge. Fascination, perhaps. "Ms. Bell, I'd be happy to discuss the community benefits package my foundation has prepared, but this isn't the venue." He reached into his jacket and produced a business card, offering it to her with manicured fingers. "Call my office." Cassidy stared at the card as if it might bite her. "I don't want your charity. I want the library restored." "That's not going to happen." His tone was final, but not unkind. Their eyes locked in silent combat, his confident, hers defiant. Neither noticed the shifting debris above them until Miles shouted a warning. Thaddeus reacted instantly, grabbing Cassidy and pulling her against him as chunks of concrete crashed down where she had been standing seconds before. The impact sent them both tumbling to the ground, his body sheltering hers. For one suspended moment, they froze, his arm around her waist, her hands pressed against his chest, faces inches apart. Cassidy felt heat rush to her cheeks as she realized she was practically straddling a man whose net worth exceeded the GDP of several small nations. "Are you all right?" Thaddeus asked, his voice lower, rougher than before. Cassidy nodded, suddenly unable to form words, acutely aware of his cologne, sandalwood and something distinctly masculine. He helped her to her feet with surprising gentleness. Perhaps the universe is suggesting we should continue this conversation somewhere safer. I don't believe in signs from the universe, Cassidy replied, finding her voice again as she brushed dust from her vintage floral dress. Then believe in liability concerns, Thaddeus countered with a wry smile. My lawyers would have a fit if the head librarian suffered injury on my construction site. Before she could protest, he was guiding her toward his Bentley, his hand at the small of her back, authoritative yet cautious, as if she might bolt or break. I have a proposition for you, Ms. Bell, he said as the driver opened the door. One that might satisfy us both. Cassidy knew she should refuse. This man represented everything she opposed: wealth without conscience, power without responsibility. Yet curiosity and the strange electric current that had passed between them during their fall compelled her to slide into the leather seat. I'm listening, she said. But I should warn you, I'm not for sale. Thaddeus's smile turned enigmatic as he settled beside her. Everyone has a price, Ms. Bell, but I suspect yours isn't monetary, which makes you far more interesting than most people I encounter. As the Bentley pulled away from the demolition site, neither realized they had just set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything they thought they knew about themselves and each other. The Bentley glided through Manhattan, traffic like a shark through water, silent, purposeful, commanding respect without demanding it. Inside, Cassidy perched uncomfortably on the butter-soft leather, acutely aware of the dust from the construction site marring her simple dress. Thaddeus Wright studied her with unconcealed interest. She was unlike the women who typically orbited his world, those carefully curated creatures of designer labels and strategic ambition. This librarian with her unruly curls and righteous indignation was refreshing. Where exactly are we going? Cassidy finally asked, breaking the charged silence. The Wright Tower, my office. His voice carried the easy confidence of a man accustomed to compliance. I believe in solving problems, face to face. Cassidy raised an eyebrow. I'm not a problem to be solved, Mr. Wright. His laugh was unexpected, deep and genuine, with crinkles forming at the corners of his eyes. No, I don't imagine you are, but our conflict might be. The car turned into an underground garage beneath a gleaming skyscraper that seemed to touch the clouds. Cassidy had passed this building countless times, but never imagined entering it. Certainly not with its infamous owner. Moments later, they were ascending in a private elevator, its glass walls offering a dizzying view of the city. Cassidy fought to maintain her composure as the floors ticked by. 77, Thaddeus commented, noticing her wide eyes. My office occupies the top 3 floors. How modest, she replied dryly. Another unexpected smile tugged at his lips. I find false modesty tiresome, don't you? Before she could answer, the elevator doors whispered open to reveal a reception area larger than her entire apartment. A striking woman with a sleek blonde bob rose from behind an imposing desk. Mr. Wright, your 11 o'clock with Tokyo is... The assistant stopped, taking in Cassidy's disheveled appearance with professional neutrality. Reschedule it, Vivian, and hold all calls. Ms. Bell and I have matters to discuss. He gestured for Cassidy to follow him through glass doors into an office that seemed designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering a god's-eye view of Manhattan, minimalist furniture that probably cost more than most cars, and walls adorned with modern art she recognized from museum exhibitions. Would you like something to drink? Water? Coffee? Something stronger? Thaddeus asked, walking to a concealed bar. Water, please. She needed to keep her wits about her. He handed her a crystal glass of water and gestured toward a seating area near the windows. As they sat, Cassidy placed her drink on a coaster, painfully aware of the contrast between this man's world and her own. So, your proposition, Mr. Wright? She aimed for businesslike, but couldn't quite mask her curiosity. Thaddeus leaned forward, his expression suddenly serious. "I've been following your campaign to save the library. You've garnered impressive community support." "Not impressive enough, apparently," she countered, glancing out the window in the general direction of the now demolished building. "On the contrary, you've created a PR headache that my team has been scrambling to manage for weeks. That shows effectiveness." Cassidy narrowed her eyes, unsure where this was heading. "I'm glad to have inconvenienced you. Which is precisely why I want to hire you." Cassidy nearly choked on her water. "Excuse me?" "The Wright Foundation funds numerous cultural initiatives. I need someone to oversee our literacy programs. Someone with passion, community connections, and clearly, formidable determination." She stared at him, certain this was some kind of joke. "You're offering me a job, after destroying my library. I'm offering you the chance to build something better." He rose and walked to his desk, returning with a tablet. "The Olympus development will include a state-of-the-art community center. Part of that could be a new library, one with resources the old building could never accommodate." He handed her the tablet displaying architectural plans. Cassidy's trained eye immediately recognized the possibilities: reading rooms, digital media labs, community meeting spaces. "This is," she began, then stopped, suspicion flooding back. "Why would you give me this kind of control?" Thaddeus returned to his seat, closer this time. "Because despite what you think of me, Ms. Bell, I'm not in the business of mindless destruction. I build. I transform. And, occasionally, I need someone to remind me of what should be preserved in that process." Their eyes met, and Cassidy felt that same electric current from earlier. She looked away first. "There's something you're not telling me." Thaddeus smiled, a slow, dangerous curve of his lips. "Perceptive. Yes, there's more." He took a breath. "The position comes with certain social obligations." "What kind of social obligations?" Cassidy's voice sharpened. "I host several charity galas each year, board meetings, business dinners." He waved a hand dismissively. "I need someone who presents the Foundation's mission with authentic passion, not another socialite who views charity as a fashion accessory." Cassidy's brow furrowed. "You want me to be your, what? Charitable arm candy?" "I prefer cultural ambassador, but essentially yes," he replied without a hint of embarrassment. "For 6 months. After that, if you've performed well, the library project is yours to direct permanently." She stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "This is absurd. You want me to pretend to be, what? Your girlfriend? Your personal librarian with benefits?" To her surprise, Thaddeus laughed again. "Nothing so tawdry, Ms. Bell. This is strictly professional. Though I admit, the optics of having you by my side at functions, someone clearly unimpressed by my wealth, would be refreshing." Cassidy turned to face him. "Why me? There must be countless qualified people who wouldn't have chained themselves to your construction site." Something shifted in his expression, a vulnerability quickly masked. "Because you stood up to me. Do you know how rare that is in my world?" She studied him, trying to discern sincerity from manipulation. "What about my current life? My apartment? My cat?" "All easily accommodated. The position includes a substantial salary and a housing allowance. Your cat is welcome to join you." Cassidy's mind raced. This was madness, yet the opportunity to create a new library to salvage something from the demolition. "I need time to think," she said finally. Thaddeus nodded, reaching into his jacket. He produced not a business card this time, but a small envelope. "My terms in writing. Take 24 hours. As he handed it to her, their fingers brushed, and Cassidy felt a jolt that had nothing to do with static electricity. "One more thing," she said, finding her voice. "If And it's a big if. I accept. You should know I haven't. She felt heat rising to her cheeks. Haven't what? Thaddeus prompted, his brow furrowed. I'm not experienced. With men, she blurted out. I've never been with anyone. Romantically. She lifted her chin, daring him to mock her. To her surprise, his expression softened. Not pity, but something like respect. Your personal life is your own, Ms. Bell. I'm hiring your mind and your passion for community service, not your body. Cassidy nodded, embarrassed, yet relieved. I'll give you my answer tomorrow. As the elevator descended to the ground floor, Cassidy clutched the envelope, her mind spinning. She had just admitted her virginity to Manhattan's most notorious bachelor, a man who had offered her a dream opportunity with strings attached, a man who had saved her life hours earlier, a man who, despite everything she wanted to believe about him, had looked at her with genuine interest, not as a conquest, but as a person worth knowing. The elevator doors opened to the lobby, and Cassidy stepped out, turning back just as they began to close. Mr. Wright, she called impulsively. He looked up, eyebrow raised in question. Why did you really save me this morning? You could have let security handle it. For a moment, he seemed caught off guard by the question. Then, with unexpected candor, instinct, Ms. Bell. Something I've learned never to ignore. The doors closed between them, leaving Cassidy with an envelope that might change her life, and the unsettling realization that Thaddeus Wright was more complex than the heartless billionaire she'd imagined. You did what? Olivia Mendez's voice echoed through Cassidy's cramped apartment, causing Mr. Darcy, her orange tabby, to dart under the couch in alarm. Cassidy's best friend and fellow bibliophile stood in the tiny kitchen, clutching the Wright foundation contract as if it might spontaneously combust. I haven't accepted yet, Cassidy clarified, snatching back the papers. That's why I called you over. I need a rational opinion. Olivia collapsed dramatically onto a kitchen chair. There is nothing rational about becoming the paid companion of Thaddeus Wright. The man is a shark in Armani. Cultural ambassador, Cassidy corrected, though the distinction felt flimsy even to her ears. And it's strictly professional. Cass, honey, nothing is strictly professional with a man like that. Olivia's dark eyes narrowed. Did you see the salary they're offering? Cassidy nodded. The figure, nearly triple her librarian's income, had made her lightheaded when she'd first read it. That's not payment for your library expertise. That's danger pay, Olivia declared, reaching for the bottle of wine they'd opened. Men don't offer money like that unless they want something. He wants to repair his public image, Cassidy argued, though doubt nibbled at her conviction. The Wright Foundation needs credibility with the community. And you're going to give it to him? After he demolished your library? Cassidy paced the small living room, Mr. Darcy tracking her movements, with suspicious yellow eyes from beneath the couch. That's just it, Liv. This could be my chance to build something even better. A modern library with resources we could only dream about before. Olivia sighed. I get it. I do. But 6 months playing arm candy to Manhattan's most eligible bachelor? That's a high price. It's just events and meetings. I'll be home every night. With the cat, Olivia reminded her pointedly. Cassidy's cheeks flushed. She hadn't told Olivia about her mortifying virginity confession to Thaddeus. Some humiliations were best kept private. Look, Olivia softened. You know I'll support whatever you decide. But promise me you'll be careful. Men like Wright don't see people like us. They see accessories or obstacles. Cassidy smiled at her friend's concern. I'm going into this with my eyes wide open. Besides, I'll have everything in writing. This is business, not 50 Shades of Wright. Olivia snorted wine through her nose at that, and the tension broke. Later that night, after Olivia had gone home with promises to help Cassidy shop for corporate warrior outfits, Cassidy sat on her fire escape, Mr. Darcy purring in her lap as she watched the city lights flicker against the velvet darkness. She thought of Thaddeus Wright, the steel in his eyes when he spoke of building, the unexpected gentleness when he'd saved her from falling debris, the flash of genuine interest when she'd challenged him. Dangerous territory, her mind cautioned. But the prospect of creating a library that could serve generations, that was worth facing a few demons, wasn't it? Her decision made, Cassidy reached for her phone. Thaddeus Wright was not a man accustomed to waiting, yet here he was at 7:58 a.m., standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, watching the city awaken while anticipating a librarian's phone call. Miles entered with a coffee and the morning briefing. Tokyo wants to reschedule for next week. The Milano project needs final approval on the environmental impact assessment, and PR has prepared 3 statements about the Mayfield site, depending on... He glanced at his boss. Developments. Thaddeus nodded absently, eyes still on the skyline. Sir, if I may, Miles ventured carefully. The board is concerned about this library situation. Bringing Ms. Bell into the foundation, especially with such unusual terms, might raise eyebrows. Thaddeus turned, his expression unreadable. Since when does the board concern itself with my staffing decisions? Since your grandmother started asking questions. That got his attention. Eleanor Wright, at 87, remained the sharpest mind on the board and the only person who could make Thaddeus second-guess himself. Grandmother called you directly? Miles adjusted his glasses nervously. She said, and I quote, "Tell my grandson that if he's finally found someone who isn't impressed by his checkbook, I want to meet her." Thaddeus nearly smiled. The old lioness had always seen through his strategies. Sir, Miles continued hesitantly, may I ask why Ms. Bell? The foundation could hire any cultural director with the right credentials. Because she's authentic, Thaddeus replied simply. You can't buy that quality, Miles. Believe me, I've tried. Before Miles could respond, Thaddeus's private line rang. He glanced at the display, unknown number, and felt an unfamiliar flutter of anticipation. That will be all, Miles. When the door closed, he answered. Thaddeus Wright. Mr. Wright, it's Cassidy Bell. Her voice sounded different over the phone. Softer, yet somehow more determined. About your offer? 30 minutes later, Cassidy found herself back in the Wright Tower, this time wearing the most professional outfit she owned, a navy blazer, over a vintage floral dress, paired with sensible heels that still left her nearly a foot shorter than Thaddeus. The executive floor buzzed with activity that paused, momentarily, as Thaddeus led her through, his hand hovering near, but not touching the small of her back. Whispers followed in their wake. Ignore them, he murmured, as they entered a conference room where several people sat around a gleaming table. Just remember, you're not here to serve them. They're here to support what we're building. We're building. The phrase sent an unexpected thrill through her. A statuesque woman with steel-gray hair, pulled into an elegant chignon, sat at the head of the table. Though she must have been in her 80s, her posture and sharp gaze suggested the vitality of someone decades younger. Grandmother, Thaddeus addressed her with a warmth Cassidy hadn't heard in his voice before. May I introduce Cassidy Bell, our new Cultural Initiatives Director. Ms. Bell, my grandmother, Eleanor Wright, chairwoman of the board. Eleanor's piercing blue eyes, so similar to her grandson's, assessed Cassidy with undisguised interest. So, you're the librarian who chained herself to my grandson's construction site. Spirited. Cassidy swallowed hard. It seemed appropriate at the time, Mrs. Wright. Eleanor, please. The older woman gestured to an empty chair beside her. Sit. Tell me why you've agreed to work with us after Thaddeus crushed your beloved library. Thaddeus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he said nothing as Cassidy took the offered seat. I haven't forgiven the destruction, Cassidy began candidly, but I'm more interested in building than holding grudges. The community needs a library, a modern one that can serve diverse needs. Mr. Wright has offered me the resources to create that. Eleanor's lips curved slightly. And what do you think he wants in return? Besides your professional expertise, of course. The room fell silent. Cassidy felt every eye upon her, including Thaddeus's intense gaze. Legitimacy, Cassidy answered simply. Community trust, neither of which can be bought, only earned. For a moment, Eleanor said nothing. Then she laughed. A rich, genuine sound that transformed her austere features. I like her, Thaddeus. She sees clearly. The tension in the room dissolved. Introductions proceeded around the table. Legal counsel, PR directors, foundation executives. Cassidy shook hands, absorbed names, and tried to look more confident than she felt. Throughout the morning, she noticed Thaddeus watching her, not with the predatory interest she'd feared, but with something closer to curiosity. When she spoke about her vision for the new library, he listened intently, occasionally making notes, or asking questions that revealed unexpected insight into community needs. By lunch, her head was spinning with information, possibilities, and the strange sensation of being taken seriously by people whose cufflinks probably cost more than her monthly rent. Overwhelming, isn't it? Thaddeus appeared at her elbow as the meeting adjourned for a catered lunch. You handled it well. Your grandmother is formidable, Cassidy observed, accepting a sparkling water from a passing server. She built this company when women weren't welcome in real estate, he replied with unmistakable pride. Everything I know about negotiation, I learned from her. Cassidy studied him. You're different around her. More human? He suggested wryly. I was going to say authentic, she countered. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps even respect. Walk with me, he said suddenly, guiding her toward a door that led to a private terrace garden, an unexpected oasis of greenery 77 floors above Manhattan. The city stretched out before them, a concrete and glass landscape bathed in midday sun. Cassidy inhaled deeply, grateful for the moment of peace after the intensity of the morning. This is where I come to think, Thaddeus said, leaning against the railing. To remember what we're really building. Cassidy glanced at him, surprised by the revelation. And what is that exactly, besides shareholder value? Instead of the corporate platitude she expected, Thaddeus was quiet for a moment. Legacy, he said finally. Not just steel and glass, but spaces that change how people live, how they connect. The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. This was not the calculating billionaire from tabloid stories or her own preconceptions. Why did you really hire me, Mr. Wright? She asked directly. There must be dozens of cultural directors with more corporate experience. He turned to face her fully, the breeze ruffling his perfectly styled hair. Because when you looked at me in front of that library, you didn't see Thaddeus Wright, CEO or billionaire or whatever label the press has assigned me this week. You saw someone destroying something you loved, and you weren't afraid to say so. His honesty disarmed her. That's not what I expected you to say. A hint of his usual sardonic smile returned. I'm occasionally capable of surprising even myself, Miss Bell. For a moment they stood in companionable silence, the city humming beneath them. You should call me Thaddeus, he said suddenly. If we're going to convince people we have a working relationship, formality won't help. Thaddeus, she tested the name, finding it less awkward than expected. Then you should call me Cassidy. He nodded, his eyes holding hers a beat longer than necessary. Cassidy. Something shifted between them in that moment. Not romance exactly, but the first fragile threads of understanding. For the first time, Cassidy wondered if perhaps she'd misjudged not just his offer, but the man himself. As they returned to the conference room, Eleanor Wright watched them with knowing eyes, her grandson and the spirited librarian who had somehow breached his carefully constructed walls on her first day. This promised to be far more interesting than she'd anticipated. "Hold still! I can't get this pin in place when you're squirming." Cassidy grimaced as Olivia secured yet another section of the spectacular evening gown hugging her curves. The private dressing room at Bergdorf Goodman was larger than her entire bathroom, with champagne on ice and a personal stylist hovering nearby. "I feel like Julia Roberts in Pretty Woman," Cassidy muttered, eyeing her reflection in the three-way mirror. The midnight blue gown with its tasteful shimmer caught the light with every movement, making her look like she was wrapped in starlight. "Except you're not a prostitute, and Thaddeus Wright isn't Richard Gere," Olivia reminded her dryly. "Though he did send his personal shopper with what appears to be an unlimited budget, so there's that." 2 weeks had passed since Cassidy had accepted her position at the Wright Foundation. Days filled with meetings, planning sessions, and immersive crash courses in corporate politics had left her exhilarated and exhausted in equal measure. Tonight would be her first public appearance as Thaddeus's cultural ambassador, a charity gala benefiting education in underserved communities. Gabriella, the razor-sharp personal shopper Thaddeus had assigned to her, circled with a critical eye. "The Marchesa is perfect, elegant but not trying too hard." She tapped a manicured finger against her chin. "Hair up, I think. Show off those collarbones." Cassidy's hand instinctively went to her neck, which felt oddly exposed in the gown's sweetheart neckline. "Isn't this a bit much?" "It's a black tie gala at the Metropolitan Museum," Gabriella replied matter-of-factly. "If anything, it's restrained. Mr. Wright specifically requested sophisticated, not showy." Olivia and Cassidy exchanged glances at this revelation that Thaddeus had opinions about her wardrobe. "Does he personally approve all the foundation?" "Staff's clothing?" Cassidy asked, unable to keep the edge from her voice. Gabriella's perfectly shaped eyebrow arched. "Only those who will be photographed beside him, representing the right name." The reminder of her role, somewhere between employee and ornament, sobered Cassidy. What had she gotten herself into? Yet as the stylist worked magic on her hair, and a makeup artist transformed her face with subtle enhancements, Cassidy couldn't deny the flutter of excitement. Beyond the glamour and discomfort lay opportunity. Donors she could persuade, connections she could leverage for the library project. "You look..." Olivia's voice faltered as the final touches were applied. "Ridiculous?" Cassidy supplied. "Beautiful," Olivia corrected softly. "Like yourself, but in high definition." Before Cassidy could respond, her phone chimed with a text. "Thaddeus, car arriving in 15 minutes. Her stomach tightened with nerves. In their 2 weeks of working together, she'd glimpsed contradictory facets of the man. The ruthless CEO barking orders during a crisis, the visionary architect explaining the future skyline, the surprisingly attentive listener when she spoke about community needs. But tonight would be different. Tonight was performance. "Ready?" Gabriella asked, holding up a small clutch that matched the gown. Cassidy took a deep breath. "As I'll ever be." Taikwan, where the sleek black limousine pulled up to the Wright Tower precisely on schedule. Cassidy's heart hammered as she navigated the lobby in unfamiliar heels, hyper-aware of the stairs following her transformed appearance. The elevator doors opened to reveal Thaddeus in impeccable black tie, his tall frame commanding the space. For a moment, he simply stared, an unreadable expression crossing his features. Self-consciousness flooded her. "Is something wrong? The dress is perfect," he interjected, his voice lower than usual. "You look remarkable, Cassidy." The sincerity in his tone sent warmth flooding through her. "Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself." A hint of his usual sardonic smile returned. "I try." He offered his arm. "Shall we?" The contact, his arm beneath her fingers, solid and warm even through layers of expensive fabric, felt unexpectedly intimate. In the limousine, Thaddeus briefed her on key attendees, while his eyes occasionally drifted to her profile. Cassidy tried to focus on the names and strategic connections, but her awareness of him, his cologne, the precise way he gestured when emphasizing a point, the rare, unguarded smile when she made a perceptive observation, kept distracting her. "Remember," he said as they approached the museum, "these people aren't your friends, but they're not your enemies either. They're potential allies." "For the Foundation, or for you?" she asked candidly. His gaze met hers directly. "Is there a difference?" Before she could answer, the car door opened to a blinding flurry of camera flashes. Thaddeus transformed instantly, his public persona settling over him like armor. Confident smile, calculated charm, hand at her elbow guiding her. Through the gauntlet of photographers with practiced ease. "Mr. Wright, who's your date?" "Thaddeus, over here." "Is this a new romance?" The barrage of questions continued as they ascended the museum steps. Cassidy maintained what she hoped was a dignified smile, focusing on not tripping in her heels. "Thaddeus Wright with Mystery Woman," she heard one reporter announcing into a camera. "Not mystery," Thaddeus corrected smoothly, pausing just long enough to create anticipation. "This is Cassidy Bell, the new Cultural Initiatives Director for the Wright Foundation. She's spearheading our literacy program expansion." Cassidy felt a rush of gratitude for his emphasis on her professional role. Not arm candy, after all. Inside, the great hall had been transformed into a glittering wonderland. Cassidy had attended museum events before, but never as a VIP. Never with champagne immediately offered by attentive servers. Never with New York's elite turning to catalog her arrival. "Breathe," Thaddeus murmured close to her ear as they moved into the crowd. "You belong here." His reassurance, so unexpected and perceptive, steadied her. What followed was a masterclass in social navigation. Thaddeus moved through the room with strategic precision, introducing her to key donors, board members, and cultural commissioners. Each time he highlighted her background in community library services and vision for the new project, creating space for her to speak rather than talking over her. "She's insisting on integrated digital learning spaces alongside traditional reading rooms," he told the education commissioner, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. "Cassidy believes libraries should evolve without losing their soul." "Libraries are memory institutions," she elaborated, growing more confident with each conversation. "They preserve the past while creating access to the future." The commissioner nodded approvingly. "Refreshing perspective. The Wright Foundation has made an excellent acquisition." Cassidy stiffened slightly at being described as an acquisition, but Thaddeus's hand pressed gently against her back. A silent request for patience. Later, at their assigned dinner table, Cassidy found herself seated beside Eleanor Wright, who regarded her with shrewd interest. "You navigate these waters well for a newcomer," the older woman observed, watching Cassidy deftly field questions from a curious museum trustee. "I'm learning to swim with sharks," Cassidy replied quietly. "Your grandson has been unexpectedly helpful." Eleanor's gaze shifted to Thaddeus, engaged in conversation across the table. "He's watching you, you know, even while speaking to the mayor's wife." Cassidy felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm representing his foundation." "Is that what you think this is about?" Eleanor asked with a knowing smile. "My grandson has never lacked for beautiful companions, Cassidy. What he lacks are people who challenge him." Before Cassidy could process this observation, the orchestra began, signaling the dancing portion of the evening. Thaddeus appeared at her elbow, hand extended in silent invitation. "I should warn you," Cassidy said as she rose. "Dancing isn't in my skill set." "Trust me," he replied simply. And somehow, on the crowded dance floor, she did. His lead was confident, but gentle, compensating for her inexperience with subtle pressure and support. They moved in surprising harmony, his height and her petite frame fitting together as if choreographed. "You're doing fine," he murmured as they turned. "Better than the congressman's wife who stepped on my foot 3 times at previous events." Cassidy laughed despite herself. "Setting a low bar for success?" "On the contrary," he replied, his eyes holding hers. "You've exceeded every expectation tonight." Something in his gaze, warmer than professional approval, more personal than she was prepared for, made her pulse quicken. "I'm just doing my job," she managed. "Is that all this is?" The question hung between them as they moved across the floor, his hand warm against her back, her fingers curled into his. Before she could formulate a response that wouldn't reveal her confusion, they were interrupted by a tall brunette in a daring red gown. "Thaddeus, darling," the woman purred, placing a perfectly manicured hand on his arm. "I've been trying to catch your eye all evening." His expression cooled perceptibly. "Victoria, enjoying the gala?" "More now," she replied, her gaze dismissively sliding over Cassidy before returning to him. "I was hoping to discuss the Milan project. Privately." Cassidy recognized the name. Victoria Hartwell, luxury hotel heiress, and if tabloids were to be believed, one of Thaddeus's former flames. "Any business matters can be addressed through my office," Thaddeus replied smoothly. "I'm afraid my dance card is full this evening." Victoria's smile tightened. "Of course, how dedicated you've become." She turned to Cassidy with artificial warmth. "You must be very special to command such attention." "Ms. Bell is revolutionizing our cultural initiatives," Thaddeus interjected before Cassidy could respond. "Her background in library science offers perspectives our foundation has been lacking." Victoria laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Library science? How charmingly academic." She leaned closer to Cassidy, her voice dropping to a stage whisper. "Word of advice, darling. Enjoy the view while it lasts. Thaddeus's interest in charitable projects tends to be seasonal." With that parting shot, she sauntered away, leaving an awkward silence in her wake. Cassidy felt her cheeks burning. "Friend of yours?" she asked lightly, though her stomach had nodded uncomfortably. Thaddeus's jaw tightened. Former business associate with unrealistic expectations. He guided her smoothly away from curious onlookers. "Victoria's family owns properties we've partnered with. The relationship ended when I declined to make it personal." "She seemed to remember things differently," Cassidy observed. "People often do," he replied cryptically. They had reached a quieter corner near an exhibit of ancient artifacts. Cassidy studied a glass case of delicate pottery rather than Thaddeus's expression. "Does it bother you?" he asked suddenly. "The assumptions people are making about us?" Cassidy considered the question carefully. "It bothers me to be seen as interchangeable with women like Victoria, as if my worth depends on your attention." She expected defensiveness. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully. "Fair assessment, though inaccurate in one respect." "Oh?" "You could never be interchangeable, Cassidy." His voice had softened. "You must know that by now." Something electric passed between them, acknowledgement of a connection neither had anticipated. Cassidy looked away first, unsettled by the intensity of his gaze and her own response to it. "We should return," she said, gesturing toward the main hall. "You probably have more networking to do." He checked his watch, a subtle, elegant timepiece that probably cost more than her annual salary. "Actually, we've fulfilled our obligations. Would you like to leave?" The question surprised her. "Don't you usually stay until the end of these things?" A rare, genuine smile curved his lips. "Usually I'm looking for an excuse to escape much earlier. Tonight was different." As they descended the museum steps later, the night air cool against Cassidy's flushed skin, she realized with startling clarity that something fundamental had shifted. Somewhere between professional obligation and personal connection, between performance and authenticity, she'd begun to see Thaddeus Wright not as the heartless billionaire of her preconceptions, but as a complex man with layers she found herself increasingly curious to explore. More dangerous still, she suspected he was beginning to see her too. Not as a convenient PR solution or temporary diversion, but as someone who had somehow worked her way past his carefully constructed defenses. In the limousine returning to Manhattan, they sat closer than strictly necessary, the silence between them charged with unspoken questions. When his hand brushed hers on the leather seat, neither pulled away. The city lights reflected against the darkened windows as they crossed the bridge, illuminating the stark truth Cassidy could no longer deny. This arrangement had become far more complicated than she'd bargained for. "You're overthinking this," Thaddeus said, leaning against the doorframe of Cassidy's new office at the Wright Foundation. 3 months into her role, Cassidy had transformed the sterile corporate space into something unmistakably hers. Vintage literary posters on the walls, a collection of rare first editions in a glass case, on loan from Eleanor Wright, who had taken an immediate shine to her, and always fresh flowers on her desk. "I'm not overthinking," she replied without looking up from the blueprint spread across her desk. "I'm being thorough. There's a difference." He approached, standing behind her to study the plans for the new community library. The scent of her shampoo, something citrusy and clean, momentarily distracted him. "The children's section needs to be relocated," she continued, unaware of his momentary lapse in focus. "Natural light is crucial for the reading nooks." Thaddeus leaned closer, his arm brushing hers as he traced a section of the drawing. "If we move it here, we lose square footage for the tech lab." Cassidy turned to argue, and found his face inches from hers. For a suspended moment, neither moved. His eyes dropped briefly to her lips before returning to meet her gaze. She cleared her throat and stepped back. "We need both. Figure it out, Mr. Architect." His mouth quirked in that half smile she'd come to recognize as genuine amusement. "Yes, ma'am." Over the past months, their working relationship had evolved into something neither had anticipated, a partnership of equals, built on mutual respect that occasionally veered into territory that felt distinctly more personal. "The board approved. Your community input plan, by the way," he mentioned casually, though the proposal had been controversial among the more traditional executives. Cassidy's face lit up. "Seriously? All of it? Even the local artist installations?" He nodded, enjoying her unguarded enthusiasm. "Even those. Grandmother was particularly persuasive on your behalf. I should send her flowers." "She prefers whiskey," Thaddeus replied dryly. "Single malt, at least 30 years old." Cassidy laughed, a sound he found himself increasingly working to elicit. Noted for future reference. The intercom buzzed. "Ms. Bell," Vivian's crisp voice announced, "your 2 o'clock is here. The children from East Harlem Library Club. Send them in." Cassidy quickly rolled up the blueprints, her focus shifting instantly. Thaddeus raised an eyebrow. "You're meeting with children?" "Focus group," she explained, straightening her desk. "Who better to consult on a children's library than the actual users?" Before he could respond, the door opened to reveal a group of 8 children ranging from 7 to 12 years old, accompanied by their librarian. Their eyes widened at the impressive office and the imposing man standing in it. "Welcome to the Wright Foundation," Cassidy greeted them warmly, moving around her desk. "I'm so excited you could help me today." The children remained clustered near the door, several eyeing Thaddeus with unconcealed suspicion. "Are you the man who knocked down our library?" A small girl with braids and glasses asked bluntly. An uncomfortable silence fell. Cassidy glanced at Thaddeus, unsure how he would respond to such direct accusation. To her surprise, he crouched down to the child's eye level. "Yes, I am. My company did that. It wasn't a good building anymore. It was old and unsafe. But Ms. Bell and I are building a new one that will be much better. That's why we need your help." The girl considered this. Our old library had a tree painted on the wall where they put gold stars when you read 10 books. Thaddeus nodded solemnly. "What if the new library had a real indoor tree with lights in it? Would that work?" Her eyes widened. "A real tree? Inside?" "If that's what the experts recommend," he said, gesturing to the children. "I hear you're my consultants today." The ice broken, the children's hesitation transformed into animated chatter. Cassidy watched in amazement as Thaddeus, the ruthless CEO, the demanding perfectionist she'd come to know, sat cross-legged on the floor of her office with children clustering around him, sketching their ideas on a large pad of paper. "Mr. Wright has meetings," she finally interjected, aware that he'd spent nearly an hour with them. "Cancelled," he replied, without looking up from a detailed drawing of what appeared to be a rocket-shaped reading nook. "This is more important." Later, after the children had departed with promises that their ideas would be incorporated into the final design, Cassidy found herself alone with Thaddeus again. "You surprised me today," she admitted. He looked up from studying the children's drawings. "How so?" "I didn't expect you to be good with kids." A shadow crossed his features so quickly she might have imagined it. "Children are honest critics. That's rare in my world." Something in his tone made her wonder about the man beneath the polished exterior. "Did you always want to build things?" He seemed surprised by the personal question. After a moment's consideration, he nodded. "Since I was 8. My father took me to a construction site, one of his first major developments. I watched this massive crane lift steel beams into place, and it seemed like magic, creating something from nothing." Cassidy smiled at the image of an enthralled boy who grew into the driven man before her. "So you're living your childhood dream?" "Parts of it," he acknowledged, his gaze lingering on her face. "Some dreams evolve." The air between them seemed to thicken. Cassidy looked away first, gathering the children's drawings into a folder. "I should get these to the design team," she said, moving toward the door. "Have dinner with me tonight." She turned back, startled by the abrupt invitation. "We have dinner together all the time. There's the fundraiser at—" "Not a work dinner," he interrupted, his expression uncharacteristically uncertain. "Just dinner. You and me." Understanding dawned. "You mean like a date?" "Yes," he said simply. "A date." Cassidy felt her heartbeat accelerate. For months, they'd been dancing around the growing attraction between them, maintaining professional boundaries despite moments of connection that seemed increasingly personal. "That would complicate things," she said carefully. "Things are already complicated." He stepped closer. "I think about you when you're not around. I find myself creating reasons to see you. That's not professional, Cassidy. It's not what I intended, but here we are." His honesty disarmed her. "Thaddeus, you can say no," he added quickly. "Nothing changes professionally. The library project continues exactly as planned. But I'm tired of pretending I don't want more than a working relationship with you." Cassidy studied him, the man who had demolished her beloved library and offered her a chance to build something better. The ruthless businessman who sat on the floor with children. The complex individual who had somehow worked his way past her defenses. "Yes," she said finally. "Dinner. But not somewhere fancy where we'll be photographed and speculated about. Somewhere real." His smile, genuine, unguarded, transformed his features. "I know just the place. This is not what I expected, Cassidy admitted as they entered the small Italian restaurant in Brooklyn. No flashy decor, no fawning maitre d', just worn wooden tables, checkered tablecloths, and the mouth-watering aroma of authentic home cooking. The elderly proprietor greeted Thaddeus with a warm embrace and rapid Italian. Thaddeus has been coming here since college, the man explained to Cassidy in accented English. Before he was important, now he only visits when he brings someone special. Cassidy felt color rise to her cheeks as she was ushered to a corner table. You went to college in New York? She asked, realizing how little she knew about his past. Thaddeus nodded as he held her chair. Columbia. Architecture and business dual degree. Hence the hands-on interest in design, she noted, accepting the menu. Among other interests, he agreed, his eyes holding hers with meaning that made her pulse quicken. What followed was unlike any of their previous dinners. No discussion of foundation business, no strategic networking, just two people discovering each other beyond professional roles. Cassidy learned about his passion for sailing, his collection, of first-edition architectural texts, his preference for jazz over classical. She found herself sharing, too. Her childhood in a small Ohio town, her formative summers reading under an oak tree, her dream of writing historical fiction that had been set aside for more practical career paths. You should write, he said, refilling her wine glass. The foundation could grant you a sabbatical when the library launches. Cassidy laughed. Planning my exit strategy already? I haven't even finished my entree. On the contrary, he replied, his voice deepening. I'm strategizing ways to keep you in my orbit longer. The directness of his statement sent warmth, spreading through her that had nothing to do with the wine. For the first time, she allowed herself to fully acknowledge the attraction she'd been fighting. The magnetic pull toward this complex man who defied every preconception she'd had about wealth, power, and privilege. After dinner, they walked along the Brooklyn promenade, the Manhattan skyline glittering across the water. When he took her hand, it felt like the most natural gesture in the world. That building, he said, pointing to a distinctive silhouette, was my first major project after taking over from my father. The critics hated it. Cassidy squeezed his hand. And how did that make you feel? He seemed surprised by the question. No one's ever asked me that. After a moment's reflection, determined to prove them wrong, the next building won design awards. Of course it did, she said with a smile. You don't strike me as someone who accepts failure easily. Not in business, he agreed. In personal matters, he trailed off, his expression contemplative. Let's just say my track record is less impressive. They had stopped walking, facing each other in the glow of an antique street lamp. The October breeze carried the scent of the river and the faint sounds of the city. Why me? Cassidy asked, the question that had lingered since his invitation. You could have anyone. That's precisely why, he replied, his hand gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. Everyone else wants something from me. Money, status, connections. You've made it abundantly clear from day one that you're unimpressed by all of that. I wouldn't say unimpressed, she corrected softly. Just not blinded by it. His fingers traced the outline of her jaw. You see me, Cassidy. Not the right name or the bank account, just me. Do you know how rare that is? The vulnerability in his voice touched something deep within her. This man who commanded boardrooms and transformed skylines was revealing a need as basic as anyone's, to be seen, to be known, to be valued for himself rather than his assets. I see you, she whispered, the good and the frustrating. His lips curved in a slight smile. Frustrating? Incredibly, she confirmed, moving imperceptibly closer. You challenge everything I thought I understood about people like you. People like me, he echoed, his fingers threading through her hair. "And what have you concluded?" "That categories are useless," she admitted. "You're just Thaddeus. Complicated, driven, occasionally infuriating, surprisingly thoughtful. Don't forget devastatingly handsome," he added, the teasing in his voice belied by the intensity of his gaze. Cassidy laughed softly. "And modest, clearly." The space between them had narrowed to almost nothing. She could feel the warmth of his breath, see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes. "I'm going to kiss you now," he said, his voice a low rumble that sent shivers down her spine. "Unless you tell me not to." Cassidy had imagined this moment, had tried not to imagine it, had dreamed of it despite her best intentions. The reality surpassed all expectation as his lips met hers, gentle at first, then with growing certainty as she responded. The world narrowed to this single point of connection, his hands cradling her face, her fingers gripping the lapels of his jacket, the skyline he had helped create glittering behind them like stars brought down to earth. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Cassidy felt as though something fundamental had shifted, a door opening to possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to consider. "Was that in the original contract?" she asked, a tremor of laughter in her voice to mask the depth of her response. Thaddeus smiled, the most open, unguarded expression she'd yet seen from him. "Definitely not. This is completely off book." As he drew her close again, Cassidy realized with startling clarity that the walls she'd built to protect herself from Thaddeus Wright, billionaire, employer, potential heartbreaker, were crumbling. More frightening still was the realization that she had no desire to rebuild them. In the golden glow of the street lamp, with the city bearing witness, she surrendered to the feelings she'd been fighting since that first confrontation amidst the rubble of her library, now a distant memory compared to the future taking shape between them. Breaking news tonight. Has Manhattan's most notorious bachelor finally been tamed? Billionaire developer Thaddeus Wright was spotted sharing an intimate dinner with Cassidy Bell, cultural director for the Wright Foundation. Sources say the pair has been inseparable for weeks. Is this merely a PR stunt, or has the Wolf of Fifth Avenue found his match? More after these messages. Olivia clicked off the television in Cassidy's apartment with a dramatic flourish. "Your secret romance isn't so secret anymore. How does it feel to be tabloid famous?" Cassidy groaned, burying her face in a throw pillow. "Mortifying. They had 3 separate photos of us. One reporter was actually hiding in the bushes at that restaurant, in the Village." 6 weeks had passed since their first kiss on the Brooklyn promenade. 6 weeks of discovery, of stolen moments between foundation meetings, of late-night conversations that stretched until dawn, of learning the contours of each other's lives beyond professional facades. "The real question," Olivia said, sprawling across the couch, "is what happens now. Your 6-month contract is nearly up." The reminder sent an uncomfortable pang through Cassidy. Between the whirlwind of the developing library project and her evolving relationship with Thaddeus, she'd almost forgotten the temporary nature of their original arrangement. "We haven't discussed it," she admitted. Olivia raised an eyebrow. "Convenient timing for him. You finish your contractual obligation just as things get serious personally." "It's not like that," Cassidy protested, though a seed of doubt had been planted. "He's been completely supportive of my work. The library project is moving forward exactly as planned. And when it's completed, what then? Do you become the decorative girlfriend who occasionally attends charity functions?" Olivia's tone softened at Cassidy's stricken expression. "I'm not trying to hurt you, Cass. I just don't want to see you sacrifice everything you've worked for because you've fallen for a man who's used to getting his way." Before Cassidy could respond, her phone chimed with a text from Thaddeus. "Meeting ended early. Dinner tonight? There's something important I need to discuss." Her stomach tightened. Important discussions rarely led to good news in her experience. "He wants to talk," she told Olivia, unable to keep the anxiety from her voice. Olivia squeezed her hand. Whatever happens, remember who you were before Thaddeus Wright crashed into your life. That woman chained herself to a library because she believed in something. Don't lose her. Hours later, Cassidy found herself in Thaddeus's penthouse, watching as he moved about the kitchen with unexpected domestic competence, preparing dinner himself rather than relying on his usual chef. "You're quiet tonight," he observed, glancing up from the pasta he was seasoning. Cassidy traced the rim of her wineglass. "Just thinking about how much has changed in 6 months." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "From chaining yourself, to my construction site to eating dinner in my home. Life takes unexpected turns. Our contract is almost up," she said abruptly, unable to dance around the subject any longer. Thaddeus's hands stilled. "Is that what's bothering you?" "Shouldn't it be? We never discussed what happens after. With the foundation position. With us." The vulnerability in her voice made her wince. He wiped his hands on a towel and approached, leaning against the counter beside her. "That's actually what I wanted to talk about tonight." Cassidy braced herself, Olivia's warnings echoing in her mind. "The board met today," he continued. "They've reviewed the library project and your overall impact on the foundation. And?" Her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. "They've unanimously approved a permanent position for you. Cultural Initiatives Director, no strings attached, reporting directly to the board rather than to me to avoid any conflict of interest." Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by suspicion. "That's very generous." "It's not generosity, it's recognition of value," he corrected. "You've transformed how the foundation approaches community engagement. Eleanor says you're the best hire we've made in a decade." Cassidy absorbed this information, trying to reconcile it with her lingering doubts. "And if things between us ended? Would the position still stand?" Hurt flashed across his features, before his expression became carefully neutral. "The offer is unconditional. Your professional accomplishments stand independent of our personal relationship." She nodded slowly, relief mingling with embarrassment at having questioned his intentions. "Is that what you're worried about?" he asked quietly. "That I'd leverage your career against your affections?" "No," she answered quickly, too quickly. "Maybe. I don't know." She set down her glass, struggling to articulate her fears. "This all happened so fast. 6 months ago, you were demolishing my library. Now we're whatever we are. Sometimes it feels like I'm living someone else's life." Thaddeus was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its usual confidence. "Do you want out? Is that what this conversation is really about?" "No." The force of her response surprised them, both. "That's not it at all. I just need to know where I stand, where we stand. Not as employer and employee, but as us, Thaddeus and Cassidy." Understanding dawned in his eyes. He took her hands, drawing her to her feet. "Come with me. There's something I need to show you." Confused but curious, Cassidy followed him through the penthouse to his home office, a space she'd never entered before. Unlike the sleek minimalism of the rest of his home, this room felt personal, lived in. Architectural models lined the shelves, drawings covered the walls, and a large drafting table stood by the windows overlooking the city. Thaddeus directed her to the table where blueprints were spread out. Familiar blueprints she'd reviewed countless times over the past months. "The library," she said, recognizing the plans for her project. "Look closer," he urged, "at the dedication, plaque design." Cassidy leaned forward, scanning the detailed renderings until she found the small rectangular section allocated for the building's dedication. The text made her breath catch. "The Cassidy Bell Library, dedicated to those who fight, for what they believe in and teach others to do the same. "You're naming it after me," she whispered, emotion tightening her throat. "It was always going to be your library," Thaddeus said softly. "From the moment you chained yourself to that construction site. You fought for it. You earned it." Tears pricked at her eyes. "But the right foundation will be acknowledged appropriately elsewhere. This is about legacy, Cassidy. Your legacy." She stared at the plans, overwhelmed by the gesture and what it represented. Not just professional recognition, but a profound understanding of what mattered most to her. "There's more," he said, guiding her to a small model on a side table, a building she didn't recognize. "This is my next project. Mixed income, housing with integrated community spaces, targeted at neighborhoods typically overlooked by developers." "It's beautiful," she said, genuinely impressed by the thoughtful design. "Where will it be built?" "That depends on you." He took a deep breath. "I've selected 3 potential locations in different cities. New York is the obvious choice, but Boston and Chicago are also viable options." Cassidy frowned, confused. "Why would my opinion determine the location?" "Because," he said, his voice dropping to an intimate murmur, "I'm hoping you'll be with me wherever this next project takes us. Not as my employee, or my cultural ambassador, or whatever other professional title we could devise. Just as the woman I've fallen in love with." The declaration hung in the air between them. Cassidy stared at him, searching his face for any hint of calculation or strategy, and finding only vulnerability and hope. "You love me?" she finally managed. A smile touched his lips. "Is that so surprising? You've upended every aspect of my carefully ordered life. You've challenged my assumptions, confronted my blind spots, and somehow become essential to my happiness in the process." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Cassidy's heart stuttered in her chest. "This isn't a proposal," he clarified quickly, opening the box to reveal not a ring but a delicate key on a silver chain. "Not yet, anyway. It's an invitation." "A key to what?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "To my life," he said simply. "To whatever we build. Together, professionally, personally, geographically. No contracts, no terms, no expiration dates. Just us. Figuring it out together." Cassidy stared at the key, understanding its significance. Not a grand gesture of ownership or possession, but something far more meaningful. Trust. Possibility. Freedom to choose. "You haven't actually said it back," he pointed out, a hint of his old sardonic humor returning, though vulnerability lingered in his eyes. "Said what back?" she teased, stepping closer. "That you love me too." His voice had roughened. "I've made myself embarrassingly clear here, Cassidy. I'd appreciate some reciprocity." She laughed softly, taking the key from the box. "Thaddeus Wright, for a brilliant man, you can be remarkably oblivious. I started falling for you the day you sat on my office floor drawing rocket ships with children from Harlem." Relief and joy transformed his features as she continued. "I love how you pretend to be cynical, but secretly believe in making the world better. I love that you remember how I take my coffee, and that you call your grandmother every Sunday. I love that you've never once made me feel like I had to choose between my principles and my heart." She slipped the chain around her neck, the key settling against her skin. "And yes, I love you. Though I maintain you're still occasionally infuriating." His laugh was joyous as he pulled her into his arms. "I wouldn't have it any other way." As his lips met hers, Cassidy reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. From adversaries to colleagues to lovers. The library that had once divided them would now stand as a symbol of what they could accomplish together. Outside the window, the Manhattan skyline glittered, a concrete landscape transformed by vision and determination. Just as she and Thaddeus, had transformed each other, breaking down walls neither had realized they'd built, and creating something neither could have imagined alone. Mean. 1 year later, golden afternoon, sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the newly completed Cassidy Bell Library. Children sprawled on colorful cushions beneath the indoor tree, now adorned with twinkling lights and golden stars, bearing the names of young readers. Students huddled around screens in the digital media lab, while elderly patrons browsed comfortable reading nooks designed for accessibility. "What do you think?" Thaddeus asked, his arm around Cassidy's waist as they observed from the mezzanine. "It's perfect," she replied, leaning into him. "Better than I imagined." Eleanor Wright approached, elegant as ever despite her recent hip replacement. "The board is impressed, my dears. Donations have tripled since the opening was announced." "Good," Cassidy said firmly. "We'll need the funding for the satellite locations." Eleanor's eyes twinkled. "Always plotting the next expansion. You've been a terrible influence on my grandson, Cassidy. He's becoming almost as idealistic as you are." "Someone has to be the pragmatist in this relationship," Thaddeus countered dryly. Cassidy slipped away as they continued their good-natured bickering, making her way to the children's section where Olivia was leading a reading circle. Her friend winked as she passed. Near the entrance, Cassidy paused before the dedication plaque, tracing the words with her fingers. From chain-wielding protester to library namesake in 18 months, life had indeed taken unexpected turns. A warm hand settled on her shoulder. "Having second thoughts about Chicago?" Thaddeus asked, referring to their upcoming relocation for the mixed-income housing project. She turned to face him, noticing as always how his expression softened when he looked at her. "Not at all. This library will thrive without daily supervision. Besides, we'll be back often enough to check on it. And for the wedding," he reminded her, his fingers brushing the engagement ring that had joined the key on her necklace, both now symbols of promises made and kept. "That too," she agreed with a smile. "Eleanor would never forgive us if we married anywhere but New York." He pulled her close, unconcerned about the patrons who might notice their affection. "Have I mentioned today that you've completely ruined me for normal corporate behavior? The board is constantly complaining that I've developed a social conscience." "Tragic," she murmured against his chest. "Next thing you know, you'll be chaining yourself to buildings to protest injustice." "Only if you're beside me," he promised, pressing a kiss to her forehead. As the library hummed with activity around them, children discovering stories, students researching, community members connecting, Cassidy reflected on the unexpected proposition that had changed her life. What had begun as a business arrangement had evolved into something neither could have anticipated. A partnership of equals, a meeting of minds, a love story written not in grand gestures, but in small moments of understanding. The library stood as testament to what they had built together, not just a building of brick and glass, but a foundation for the future, stronger and more beautiful than either could have created alone.